This is a recent study by Rain et al. In the Condor. They were looking at population trends over time using radar passage rates of birds heading from the sea to inland breeding colonies. And you can see that there's been a massive decline for the Newell shearwater, 94% over that time period, and 78% for the Hawaiian petrel. So it's a pretty catastrophic decline over a short period of time. And we're looking at reasons for this. One of the major contributors is mortality from power line collisions. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about 8 years of work. So quickly, I've given that 6 previous PSGs as well. So in this talk, or in this slide here, you can see on the left is a heat map of power line collisions as detected by acoustic sensors. And so we've modeled this work with 3 different models, and we amalgamate the models. And we're currently estimating about 981 to 1,600 dead birds annually. And so we look at other data sets too to compare and validate the dead birds. When we look at the dead birds actually found under power lines, these also look to be about 1,000 or more birds per year. And this is the most exciting part that I can't really talk about too much right now, but this is a new model. We use observer data that's about 6,000 hours of observer data and 9,000 Seabird passages across power lines. And so with this data, what we're doing is I'm working with Tim Tinker, building Bayesian MCMC models, looking at flight height distributions for every span on the island, so 1,700 spans, and looking at the collision risk for each individual wire within those spans. So anyways, this corroborates the results from the acoustic data, but also showing that we might be underestimating in certain areas. Those areas that we're underestimating seem to have dead birds. That's what that's showing there. So what we're saying is the minimum mortality is 981 to 1,600 per year. And over the course of this research program, we're looking at about 6,000 to 11,000 birds. And power line collisions have been identified going back all the way to 1994 at pretty high levels. So we're looking at 25 years at least of mortality on this scale. So why are power lines so bad? In red on this figure are the taller transmission wires, the higher risk wires that we study. There's 900 more kilometers of wires I'm not showing. And so in blue is the general breeding areas for both these species. And you can see at nighttime they have to transit inland, passing multiple sets of power lines at times in full darkness, and head back to sea in full darkness, again transiting those power lines. And so it's in this darkness that they have a hard time detecting the wires, and they can be traveling up to 60 miles an hour too. So also power lines are really tall. This is a figure I created just to give scale. That little red thing is a human. And the first 3 moving left to right are the tallest power lines on the island that have the highest collision rates, generally speaking. So these can have high collisions in almost any terrain. And the next 2 over can have collisions if they're in a mountainous situation, particularly in a seabird colony or along a mountain ridge. And here's an example of a tall set of power lines with very short vegetation. These wires well up into the seabird flight passage, or the height of the seabirds. And here's a LiDAR image of one of our worst power lines on the island. These are wires that are across a valley. So at mid-span there's the wires are about 85 meters above ground. And so birds fly well below these wires, 35 meters below these wires. And it turns out that the wires themselves are right in the core of the bird's flight height distribution, so extremely high levels of collisions. So what can we do about this? So one, we can remove the wires from the airspace. Most obvious thing is to underground wires, and we have been successful working with the power company. These are wires, these are the shortest wires we've studied on Kahili Mountain. They're right in the middle of a seabird colony. And so these were underground in 2015. Most of them were underground. So that's a big success, but it's very expensive to underground wires, and we've now affected 0.3% of the overall wires that we're concerned about. So and there's no additional plans to underground any more wires. So in terms of cost, undergrounding is extremely prohibitive for the power company. So they can reconstruct the wires, essentially take the vertical array and spread it horizontally, and there's plans to do this. Here's an example at Kealia Beach. Those top wires were all displayed vertically before. So this is reducing collisions, but we still have collisions at this site. And this project was extremely expensive. It's about $1.3 million, and we're now affecting 0.6% of the island's at-risk power lines. So because of the cost of these things, we wanted to look at alternatives. And I should mention that the power company is looking at some larger scale rebuilds of the power lines, which will greatly reduce strikes. But the geographic scale at which we're considering this is limited because of the cost. So one of the options that we're promoting is removing the static wire, which I'll explain a little further. And we also want to make the wires themselves visible, make the airspace where the wires are more visible, and show the birds that there's a hazard there. So easiest way to do this is plant trees. This has been promoted for more than 25 years. If the trees are as tall as the wires, the birds can see those and they'll fly up and over. Not being done. Unfortunately, because we now have a wood-burning fuel power plant, we're actually taking a lot of trees down. And the wildlife laser fence, which I'll discuss, and bird diverters. So static wire removal. In this image, the central wire there is the static wire. It doesn't carry electricity, and it can be removed. It protects the other wires from lightning strike. So in 2016, working with the power company, this was removed over a few kilometers of wires. And we didn't have a localized control, so we had to model the before and after effects against other areas on the island. And at that time, we were estimating 52 to 82% reduction just from removing the one single top wire. So using that observer model I mentioned earlier, what we were doing is building this flight height distribution. This is what this figure is showing. On your x-axis, you have meters above the wires, and at 0 is the top wire, and in purple is all the wire array vertical. And then below that is negative birds flying below wire or at wire height. And you can see for this example span, that's 429, birds fly well below these wires, within the wires and above. So anyways, we developed that type of flight height distribution and collision risk for each individual wire for all 1,700 wires we're interested in. And it looks like if we remove the static wire, on average, we're going to get a 36 to 72% over the whole island where that static wire exists. And it varies due to topography and vegetation height. So static wire is cost effective because really it's the cost of the power company's labor of just removing the wire. There's no additional infrastructure being added. And as they showed in 2016, multiple kilometers can be done over a few days. So we can implement this very quickly. And so the wildlife laser fence, this is something we developed starting in 2012. And the concept here is to fire laser beams between two power poles so the birds see that there's an obstacle in that airspace. And because the laser light is scattering off dust and other particles in the air. So this area is a place called the Central Region, has a pretty high collision rate. And we've been working with an engineer named Adam Elzinga. He has developed the aiming system, the laser housings, and all the circuitry to make this happen. And I have a little video here. It's actually a wedge-tail shearwater at a portable laser fence that we can drive around with a truck to do tests. If I can get it to play. See him come in and fly up and over. So that's exactly what we want to see happen. And it is what we did see happen. So there's a large increase in avoidance behavior when the laser's on versus when they're not on at real power lines. And at this area that's in the image on the left, we found a 47% reduction in collisions over a 2-year period. And then we also did the same study at a higher elevation area that has even higher collision risk. And overall, we found a 63% reduction. But when we looked a little more in detail at this data, it was largely driven by moon effects as well. So when there's no moon, the lasers are extremely effective, 94% effective. But when the moon's out, it drops to 41%. So what that shows us is that potentially we could increase the brightness of the lasers when the moon is out, program them to be brighter, and move that 94% over to when the moon is out as well. And then the last solution that we've been heavily promoting is bird diverters. And in this image are the reflective type. So they essentially are just making the wires appear larger and reflect any ambient light from moon or street lights or car lights. And we managed to get a pilot study going in 2015 and 2016. Again, no local control, so we modeled this to a 42% strike reduction, which was very promising. We've also, for the last 2 years, been heavily promoting these LED diverters. These capture solar power during the day and have a little pulsing blink at nighttime. So even in extremely dark areas, the birds can tell that there's a hazard. And very late this season, we got a pilot study off the ground, many logistical challenges, but we were surprised to find a 56% reduction in the late study that we got off the ground. So we think if we could do this at a much larger scale, more effective study, that we could see a larger impact. And South African colleagues have found a more than 90% reduction with these very diverters for nighttime collisions of birds. And so with that, I just want to say that we feel that a combination of the major power line reconstruction that the power company is proposing and the isolated places with the highest strike rate, in combination with widespread application of static wire removal, diverters, and lasers, could greatly reduce strikes overall across the island and potentially get strikes down into a range that could be offset with colony management and mitigation. Thank you.
You have time for questions.
Yes.
When I was around on the North Shore, I saw that there were spans that had a bajillion diverters right next to spans with no diverters. So what's the strategy for deploying these things?
Well, that was sort of the level of funding we got was where you saw the diverters. So we think with the LED diverters, we actually want to use as few as possible because it is a light source, and we're concerned at higher elevation for sure. So I think now with the LED diverters, we can only do as little as the top wire and potentially have pretty big spacing. Whereas you saw them, we did every single wire. We wanted to maximize any possible effects once we started that project. So
that was those were test panels, the test spans. The one that was
yeah, yeah.
Do you have any of the diverters here?
I can bring them tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there concern for lightning strikes when you take off a static wire?
There is. The power company definitely does have that concern, the engineers for sure. So you can replace the static wire with something called, I forget, it clamps the electricity. So, but about 45% of our wires already don't have a static wire. So those wires are already exposed on their own without the bird influence. And the other thing too is the power company, if they know that there wasn't a car accident or some other reason that the circuit was open, they can just immediately digitally clamp it and let power come through again. So. But again, sorry, that's not really my expertise.